I, 28F, stood in the suffocating quiet of the lawyer's office. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and cheap air freshener. My stepmother, Eleanor, sat beside me, her posture ramrod straight. Her grief was a performance, a carefully constructed mask of sorrow that did not quite reach her eyes. My stepbrother, Julian, sat on her other side, a carbon copy of her cold composure. The three of us were a tableau of a family that never was, brought together by the man who had failed to connect us in life. We were here for the reading of my father's will. I expected it to be simple. I expected it to be painful. I did not expect it to be the beginning of everything. Mr. Thompson, a man who seemed to be made entirely of beige tweed and nervous throat clearing, adjusted his glasses. He looked at each of us over the rims. His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than the others. I felt a small, cold knot tighten in my stomach. Something was wrong. This was not going to be a straightforward affair of dividing assets and signing papers. The tension in the room was a living thing, pressing in on me from all sides. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to go home and mourn my father in peace, away from the woman he married and the son she brought with her. He began to read from the document in a low, monotone voice. I, Robert Miller, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The legal jargon washed over me. I heard my name mentioned, a small inheritance set aside for me. It was a respectable sum, enough to be comfortable, but not life-changing. I saw a flicker of triumph in Eleanor's eyes. She knew, or thought she knew, what was coming next. She believed the bulk of the estate, the house, the business, the legacy would fall to her and Julian. That was the story my father had always told. That was the peace he had tried to keep. Mr. Thompson paused. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water from a glass on his desk. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. And now, he said, his voice dropping even lower, we come to a final addendum. Robert added this just 2 months ago. He looked directly at me, then at Eleanor. He insisted I read this part verbatim to all of you, together. Another pause. Eleanor shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a silent, impatient rhythm on her leather handbag. She wanted him to get on with it, to confirm her victory. The lawyer cleared his throat one last time. He read the words slowly, each one landing like a stone in the quiet room. To my daughter Clara and to my wife Eleanor and her son Julian, I must leave you with a final truth. I held my breath. This was it. This was the part that felt wrong. My life was not what it seemed. I was not the man you thought I was. My eyes shot to Eleanor. Her mask of polite grief slipped for just a second. A flash of pure, unadulterated fury replaced it before she smoothed her features back into a mask of concerned confusion. She knew. Whatever this was, she knew something. I was sure of it. Mr. Thompson then reached into a large manila envelope on his desk. He pulled out a dark blue booklet. He placed it on the polished wood between us. It was a passport. But it was not my father's American passport. This one was different. The cover was a deep, unfamiliar blue, the emblem foreign. He left this in my care, the lawyer explained, his voice barely a whisper. He said it would explain things, or at least it would be the start of an explanation. He slid it across the desk. It stopped in the very center of the space between me and Eleanor. I stared at the name embossed in gold on the cover. It was not Robert Miller. The name was Adrien Dubois. The photograph inside, however, was undeniably my father. It was a younger version of him. His hair darker, his jawline sharper, but it was him. The man who raised me, the man I thought I knew, had another name, another identity. A whole other life, hidden away in a safe deposit box with his lawyer. The room felt like it was tilting. Who was Adrien Dubois? Why did my father need a second passport? The questions swirled in my head, a dizzying storm of confusion and betrayal. Eleanor let out a small, theatrical gasp. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of shock. "Robert. An affair? Another family?" She looked at Mr. Thompson, her eyes wide with feigned disbelief. "Did he have another family, Mr. Thompson?" Her question was a performance designed for my benefit. She was trying to frame the narrative, to paint my father as a simple cheater, a man with a secret mistress tucked away somewhere. It was a plausible, almost mundane explanation for such a grand deception. But it felt wrong. It felt too simple, too convenient for her. Julian, ever his mother's echo, chimed in. "This is insane," he said, shaking his head. "Dad would never. He loved my mother." The words were hollow, rehearsed. He glanced at his mother for his next cue. I watched them, this mother and son duo, moving in perfect predatory sync. They were a team, and I was the outsider. I had always been the outsider. But now, staring at that passport, I realized my position was even more precarious than I had ever imagined. I was not just the odd one out. I was the one in the dark. "The will does not specify the nature of his other life," Mr. Thompson said, carefully avoiding Eleanor's question. "It only states that the final distribution of his primary assets, including the company and the estate, is contingent upon a full and transparent investigation into the affairs of Adrien Dubois." He looked at me. "And he appointed you, Clara, as the sole executor of this investigation." The air rushed out of my lungs. Me? Why me? Why would he put me in charge of uncovering his deepest secrets? It felt like a burden, a heavy, impossible weight he had placed on my shoulders from beyond the grave. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "Her?" she snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. "She's just a child. She knows nothing of his business, of his life. It should be me. I was his wife." Her carefully crafted facade of the grieving widow was gone, replaced by the raw, grasping greed I had always known was lurking just beneath the surface. She saw her inheritance, her future, slipping through her fingers, and she was panicking. It was the first honest emotion I had seen from her all day. It was ugly. "The will is legally binding, Eleanor," Mr. Thompson said, his tone firm but weary. He had clearly anticipated this reaction. "Clara is the appointed executor for this specific task. The final assets are frozen until she presents a satisfactory report to my office on the identity and activities of Adrien Dubois." He pushed a small, old-fashioned iron key across the desk toward me. "Your father also left this for you. He said it opens a box at his old city apartment. He said it was the best place to start." I picked up the key. It was cold and heavy in my palm. My father had a city apartment? He had always told us he sold it years ago, right after he married Eleanor. Another lie. How many more were there? My mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer scale of the deception. My father, the steady, predictable man I knew, was a phantom, a man of secrets and lies. And he had left me a treasure map, a key to unlock a life I never knew existed. I looked at Eleanor's face, twisted with rage, and then at Julian's, a mask of sullen resentment. They were furious. They were scared. And in that moment, a new feeling began to crystallize in my heart, pushing past the grief and confusion. It was determination. I would find out who Adrien Dubois was. I would uncover every last one of my father's secrets. Not just for him, and not just for the inheritance. I would do it for me. I would do it to understand the man who had raised me. And I would do it to see the look on Eleanor's face when I finally untangled the web of lies she was so clearly a part of. The game had just begun. After the meeting, I walked out of the lawyer's office into the cold afternoon air. The city felt different, sharper, as if a veil had been lifted. Eleanor and Julian followed close behind, their footsteps loud and angry on the pavement. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I clutched the key in my pocket, its sharp edges digging into my palm. It was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned to smoke. I needed to get away from them, to think, to breathe. "Clara, wait," Eleanor called out. her voice dripping with false concern. I stopped but did not turn around. I did not want to see her face. I did not want to engage in her games. "We should talk about this," she said, catching up to me. "This is a shock to all of us. We need to handle this as a family." The word family sounded like a curse coming from her lips. We were never a family. We were just people who lived in the same house, bound by a man who was now gone. I finally turned to face her. "There is nothing to talk about, Eleanor," I said, my voice colder than I intended. Mr. Thompson was very clear. I have a job to do. I held her gaze, refusing to back down. For the first time in my life, I was not intimidated by her. The power dynamic had shifted. My father's secret had given me a strange, unexpected leverage, and I was not going to give it up. Julian stepped forward, placing a protective hand on his mother's arm. "You don't know what you're doing, Clara," he sneered. "You're going to mess everything up. Let my mother handle this. She knew him best." His words were meant to sting, to remind me of my place as the outsider, the daughter from a previous life my father had left behind. But they had the opposite effect. They fanned the flames of my resolve. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They were about to find out how wrong they were. "I'm doing exactly what my father asked me to do," I replied, my voice steady. "If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with his lawyer." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing on the sidewalk. I did not look back. I could feel their fury radiating across the distance, a toxic heat that I was finally walking away from. I had a key in my pocket and a mystery to solve. For the first time since my father's death, I felt a flicker of purpose. The grief was still there, a heavy ache in my chest, but now it was joined by something else. A burning need for the truth. I called my best friend, Maya, as soon as I got to my car. I needed to hear a friendly voice. I needed someone to tell me I was not going crazy. "You will not believe what just happened," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I recounted the events of the will reading. The second passport, the other name, the frozen assets, the key. I laid it all out for her, the words tumbling out in a rush. Maya was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Wow," she finally said. "Just, wow. A secret identity? Clara, this is like something out of a movie." Her reaction, a mix of shock and excitement, was exactly what I needed. It helped to ground me, to pull me out of the swamp of my own emotions. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. "Are you going to go to that apartment?" "I have to," I said, starting the car. It's what he wanted. It's the only way to find out the truth. I knew it was not going to be easy. I knew Eleanor and Julian would fight me every step of the way. But I did not care. This was bigger than them now. This was about my father. It was about the life he had hidden from all of us. And I was the only one who could bring it into the light. The city apartment was my first stop. I drove through the familiar streets, but everything looked strange, foreign. I was not just driving to an apartment. I was driving toward a ghost. I was driving toward Adrian Dubois. The apartment building was an old, elegant pre-war structure in a part of the city I rarely visited. It was the kind of place my father had always admired, with a marble lobby and a uniformed doorman. It was a world away from the sterile, modern suburban house he shared with Eleanor. As I walked toward the entrance, I felt a sense of nervous anticipation. What would I find inside? What secrets were waiting for me behind that door? The doorman, an elderly man with a kind face, recognized the name Miller immediately. "Ah, Robert's daughter," he said with a small, sad smile. I was so sorry to hear of his passing. He was a good man. Very quiet, but a good man. He looked at me with a strange intensity. "He always spoke so highly of you. Said you were the smart one." His words were a small comfort, a reminder of the father I knew, the man who had always believed in me. It gave me the strength to keep going. I took the creaky, old-fashioned elevator up to the 10th floor. The hallway was silent, the air still and heavy. I found the apartment at the end of the hall, number 10B. I stood in front of the door for a long moment, my hand trembling as I raised the key. This was it, the first step into my father's secret world. I took a deep breath, inserted the key into the lock, and turned. The lock clicked, loud and final in the silent hallway. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, into the life of Adrienne Dubois. The apartment was not what I expected. It was not a sterile bachelor pad or a hidden love nest. It was a home. It was small, just a living room, a bedroom, and a small kitchen, but it was filled with things. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Stacks of records were piled next to an old turntable. A worn leather armchair sat by the window, a reading lamp beside it. It was a space that felt lived in, a space that felt like him. Or at least a version of him I was just beginning to meet. I walked through the rooms in a daze. There were no pictures of me, no pictures of Eleanor or Julian. There were no family photos at all. It was a space devoid of his other life, the life I had been a part of. It was a sanctuary, a place where he could be someone else. I ran my hand along the spines of the books. They were mostly history and philosophy, with a surprising number of poetry collections. My father, the practical businessman, read poetry. It was another small crack in the facade of the man I thought I knew. Then I saw it. On the small wooden desk in the corner of the living room, there was a locked metal box. It was old and slightly rusted, the kind of thing you might find in an antique shop. It was the box the key was for. My heart started to pound in my chest. This was it. The answers were in this box. I sat down at the desk, my hands shaking, and fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I lifted the lid, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, there was another passport. This one was Swiss. The name was Adrienne Dubois. The picture was my father, but there were other things too. A stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a set of bank statements from a Swiss bank account, and a small leather-bound journal. I reached for the journal first. My hands were trembling so much I could barely open it. The first page was dated 20 years ago, right around the time he met Eleanor. His handwriting was neat and precise, the same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards and notes my whole life. I started to read. The journal was not a day-to-day account of his life. It was more of a collection of thoughts, of fears, of secrets. He wrote about his first wife, my mother, and the love they shared. He wrote about his grief after she passed away. And then he wrote about Eleanor. He described her as a whirlwind, a force of nature who had swept into his life when he was at his most vulnerable. He admitted he had been lonely, and she had filled a void. But there was a darkness there, too. He wrote about her ambition, her greed, her manipulative nature. He wrote about how she had slowly, methodically isolated him from his old friends, his old life. He wrote about Julian, her son, and how she had pushed him to be a part of my father's company, a part of his legacy. My father had resisted, but Eleanor was relentless. He felt trapped, a prisoner in his own home. He had created Adrienne Dubois as an escape. The apartment was his refuge. The secret bank account was his way of protecting a part of his fortune from her grasping hands. He had been siphoning money into it for years, a little at a time, building a nest egg that she knew nothing about. The letters were from a woman named Sophie. They were written in French. I had taken French in high school, but I was rusty. I could only make out a few words. My love, I miss you. When will I see you again? My heart sank. So Eleanor was right. There was another woman, but reading my father's journal, it did not feel like a sordid affair. It felt like something else, something deeper. The letters were not passionate, torrid love letters. They were filled with a quiet, steady affection. They spoke of shared memories, of art, of music, of a life lived together in another place, another time. I looked at the bank statements. The account held a significant amount of money, more than enough to change a life. More than enough to make Eleanor very, very angry. This was what she was after. This was what she was afraid I would find. The will was not just a set of instructions, it was a test. My father had set up a final, posthumous challenge. He was testing me. He was testing Eleanor. He was forcing a confrontation that he had been too afraid to face in life. I spent hours in that apartment, reading, piecing together the fragments of my father's other life. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. He was not a cheater. He was a man who had made a mistake, who had married the wrong woman and had spent 20 years trying to find a way out. Adrien Dubois was not just an escape. He was a lifeline. He was the man my father had been before Eleanor, the man he still was, in secret. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew what I had to do. I packed up the journal, the letters, and the bank statements. I put them in my bag, along with the Swiss passport. This was my evidence. This was my ammunition. I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was an executor. I was an investigator. And I was about to go to war. I left the apartment and locked the door behind me. The hallway was dark now, the only light coming from the small lamp at the end of the corridor. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt a sense of resolve I had not felt before. I was not afraid of Eleanor anymore. I was not afraid of Julian. I had the truth on my side. And the truth, I was beginning to realize, was a powerful weapon. My first call was to Mr. Thompson. I needed to let him know what I had found. I needed to understand the legal implications. I met him at his office the next morning. I laid everything out on his desk. The journal, the letters, the bank statements. He read through them carefully, his expression growing more and more grim. "This is extensive," he said, finally looking up at me. He never told me the details. He only told me that he had made provisions, that he had a plan to protect his legacy. To protect you. He looked at me with a new respect in his eyes. He trusted you, Clara. He knew you were the only one who would be strong enough to see this through. "What does this mean, legally?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For the will? For Eleanor?" I needed to know what I was up against. I needed to be prepared. "It means everything," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The will states that the assets are frozen pending a full and transparent investigation. This journal, these bank statements, this is the investigation. If we can prove that Eleanor was acting in bad faith, that she was manipulating your father, that she was trying to defraud the estate, then we can challenge her claim to the primary assets." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We can cut her out, completely." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The power to dismantle Eleanor's entire world was in my hands. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was also a chance for justice, for my father, and for me. "What do we do next?" I asked, my voice stronger now. I was ready. I was ready for the fight. "The next step is to confront her," he said, "but not directly. Not yet. We need more. We need undeniable proof that she knew about this and was actively trying to hide it." He tapped the bank statements. "This account is the key. We need to find out if she has tried to access it. We need to see if she has made any moves to consolidate her power at the company since your father's death." He was right. I needed to be smart. I could not just storm in and accuse her. I had to be strategic. I had to play her game. But I would play it better. I had an advantage she did not. I had the truth. I spent the next few days gathering information. I spoke to old employees at my father's company, people who had been loyal to him, people who despised Eleanor. They told me stories of her ambition, of her ruthlessness. They told me how she had systematically replaced my father's key people with her own loyalists. They told me she had been making inquiries about offshore accounts, about moving assets. She was preparing to take everything. I also hired a translator to help me with Sophie's letters. As I read the full translations, a new story emerged. Sophie was not a mistress. She was my father's first love. They had known each other in college, in Switzerland. They had planned a life together. But my father's family had disapproved. They had forced him to come home, to take over the family business. He had broken Sophie's heart. He had married my mother, and he had tried to forget. But he never did. After my mother died, he had reconnected with Sophie. She was a widow now, living a quiet life in a small Swiss village. They had rekindled their friendship, which had slowly blossomed back into love. He had been visiting her for years, under the guise of business trips. Adrien Dubois was the name he used when he was with her. It was the name of the man he could have been, the man he wanted to be. He had been planning to leave Eleanor. He had been planning to move to Switzerland to be with Sophie. He had been planning to start a new life. But he had run out of time. The knowledge was both heartbreaking and beautiful. My father had found love again. He had found a measure of happiness in his secret life. It was a comfort to me, a small light in the darkness of his deception. But it also made me more determined than ever to honor his final wishes. He had wanted to be free of Eleanor. He had wanted to protect his legacy for me and for the woman he truly loved. I would not let him down. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Julian. I ran into him at a coffee shop near my apartment. He looked terrible. He was pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. He was not the smug, confident man I had seen at the lawyer's office. He was a scared little boy. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." He led me to a quiet corner table. He could not meet my eyes. He just stared into his coffee cup as he spoke. "My mother, she's out of control," he whispered. "She's been trying to access Dad's accounts. She's been shredding documents. She's terrified of what you might find." I just looked at him. I did not say a word. I let him talk. I let him unravel. "She knew," he said, his voice breaking. "She knew about the other account. She found a statement a few months ago. She confronted him. They had a huge fight. He told her he was leaving her. He told her he was changing the will." He finally looked up at me. His eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. I think the stress of it all. I think that's what killed him." The confession hung in the air between us. It was the final damning piece of evidence. Eleanor had known everything. She had known my father was planning to leave her. She had known about the money, and she had been actively trying to cover it up, to steal what was not hers. The fight, the stress. It was possible. It was very, very possible that she was responsible for his death. Not directly, perhaps, but her greed, her cruelty. It had broken his heart in more ways than one. I left Julian sitting in the coffee shop, a broken man. I did not feel pity for him. I only felt a cold, hard resolve. It was time. It was time to end this. I called Mr. Thompson. "I have what we need," I said. "Set up a meeting. With Eleanor. With Julian. It's time for the truth to come out." The final meeting was held in the same stuffy conference room at Mr. Thompson's office. The atmosphere was even more tense than before. Eleanor sat across from me, her face a mask of defiant fury. Julian sat beside her, pale and silent, refusing to look at me. He was a coward, trapped between his domineering mother and the truth he knew he could not escape. Mr. Thompson began the meeting. "We are here today to review the findings of Clara's investigation as stipulated in Robert Miller's will," he said, his voice calm and professional. He gestured to me. "Clara, if you would." I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. I looked directly at Eleanor. I did not let my gaze waver. I started to speak. I told them everything. I told them about the apartment, the books, the music. I told them about the journal, about my father's unhappiness, his loneliness, his fear. I told them about Adrien Dubois, the man he was when he was free. Then I told them about Sophie. I told them about their love, their history, their plans for the future. I watched Eleanor's face as I spoke. Her mask of composure began to crumble. Her eyes narrowed. Her jaw tightened. She was losing control. Finally, I laid the bank statements on the table. "This is the Swiss bank account," I said, my voice clear and strong. "The account my father set up to protect his assets from you, Eleanor. The account you knew about. The account you tried to access after his death." "That's a lie," she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "I knew nothing about this. This is a fabrication. She's trying to steal my husband's money." Her voice was shrill, hysterical. The performance was over. This was the real Eleanor, raw, greedy, and desperate. "Is it a lie, Julian?" I asked, turning my gaze to him. He flinched as if I had struck him. He looked at his mother, then at me. His face was a mess of conflict and fear. "Tell us what you told me at the coffee shop, Julian," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Tell us about the fight. Tell us about the shredded documents. Tell us the truth." Julian broke. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "It's true," he sobbed. "It's all true. She knew. She knew everything." The silence in the room was absolute. Eleanor stared at her son, her face a mask of pure, venomous hatred. She had been betrayed by her own flesh and blood. Her most loyal soldier had deserted her on the battlefield. It was over, and she knew it. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "In light of this new information," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "and given the clear evidence of fraudulent intent, I will be filing a petition with the probate court to have Eleanor Miller removed as a beneficiary of the will. The entirety of the estate, including the company and all personal assets, will pass to the sole remaining heir, Clara Miller." Eleanor let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She stood up so quickly that her chair fell over with a crash. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You will regret this," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You will not get away with this." "I think I already have," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I felt no triumph, no joy. Only a profound sense of sadness and relief. Sadness for the father I had lost, and the father I had never known. And relief that the long, ugly fight was finally over. Eleanor stormed out of the room, dragging a weeping Julian behind her. The door slammed shut, leaving me and Mr. Thompson in the sudden, echoing silence. I had won. I had uncovered the truth. I had honored my father's final wish. I was free. But I knew in that moment that the ghosts of the past would linger. The story of Robert Miller and Adrienne Dubois was not over. It was just beginning. And I was the one who would have to carry it. I picked up the Swiss passport from the table. It felt warm in my hand. It felt like a promise. A promise of a new beginning. A promise of a life lived in truth. A life my father had always wanted, but never had the chance to live. I would live it for him. I would live it for us both. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and administrative tasks. With Mr. Thompson's guidance, I began the process of untangling my father's two lives and merging them into one coherent legacy. The court moved surprisingly quickly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence and Julian's confession. Eleanor was formally disinherited, her name struck from every document. She fought it, of course, with a team of expensive lawyers who threw out wild accusations and baseless claims, but the truth was a solid wall they could not break through. She lost. She lost everything. I saw her one last time on the steps of the courthouse after the final ruling. She looked smaller, diminished, stripped of the power and prestige she had clung to so tightly. The designer clothes and perfect hair could not hide the bitterness in her eyes. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something that might have been regret. But it was quickly replaced by the familiar sneer. "You think you've won," she said, her voice a low rasp. "But you've just inherited a pile of secrets and lies. You'll be miserable just like he was." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I never saw her again. Julian sent me a letter a few weeks later. It was a rambling, pathetic apology, filled with excuses and self-pity. He wrote that his mother had cut him off completely, blaming him for their downfall. He was alone, broke, and begging for a second chance. I read the letter and then I threw it in the fire. He had made his choice. He had stood by and watched his mother emotionally abuse my father for years. He had been her accomplice. There was no room for him in my new life. My new life. It was a strange concept. For the first time, I was in control. I was the head of my father's company. I was the keeper of his fortune. I was the guardian of his secrets. It was a daunting responsibility, but also a liberating one. I started by making changes at the company. I fired Eleanor's loyalists and brought back the people my father had trusted, the people who had been pushed out. We worked together to restore the company's integrity, to rebuild it based on the principles my father had believed in before Eleanor had corrupted everything. But the most important journey was a personal one. I booked a flight to Switzerland. I had to meet Sophie. I had to see the life my father had built there. I was nervous. I did not know what to expect. Would she resent me? Would she see me as a painful reminder of the man she had lost? I found her in a small, charming house nestled in the Alps. She was older than I expected, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She welcomed me with a warm embrace, as if I were a long-lost relative. We sat in her garden, surrounded by flowers, and she told me stories about my father. She told me about the young man she'd fallen in love with, the passionate idealist who loved poetry and art. She told me about their chance reunion and the quiet, happy years they had shared in secret. "He loved you very much, Clara," she said, her voice soft. "He talked about you all the time. He was so proud of the woman you had become." She showed me pictures of him, pictures I had never seen before. Pictures of him smiling, truly smiling, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face. He looked happy. He looked free. She told me that he had planned to tell me everything. He was just waiting for the right time. He wanted to introduce us. He wanted us to be a family, a real family. "He bought the house next door," she said, pointing to a small cottage just down the lane. "He was fixing it up for you. He wanted you to have a place here, with us." The tears I had been holding back for so long finally came. I wept for the father I had lost, for the future we could have had. I wept for the years that had been stolen from us by Eleanor's greed. Sophie held me, comforting me. A woman who had loved my father as much as I had. In her, I found a connection to him that I had thought was lost forever. I stayed in Switzerland for a month. I helped Sophie sort through my father's things in the cottage. It was filled with books he had bought for me, paintings he thought I would like, a whole life he had been building for me in secret. It was a painful, beautiful process of discovery. I was getting to know my father all over again. I was meeting Adrian Dubois. And I was starting to understand that he and Robert Miller were not two separate people. They were two halves of the same man, a man who had been torn between duty and desire, between a life he was forced to live and a life he longed for. Before I left, Sophie gave me a small wooden box. "He wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was a single, perfect pearl necklace. It had belonged to her mother. "He wanted you to have a piece of our family," she explained. I put it on. It felt like a blessing, a connection to a past I had never known and a future I was just beginning to imagine. When I returned home, I made a decision. I sold the big, empty house in the suburbs, the house that had been a prison for my father. I sold Eleanor's gaudy furniture and tasteless art. I stripped it of all her influence, of all the bad memories. And then, with the money, I started a foundation in my father's true name, the Adrian Dubois Foundation for the Arts. It was a way to honor the man he truly was, the man who loved poetry and beauty. It was a way to turn his secret life into a public legacy of good. I moved into the city apartment, my father's sanctuary. I filled it with my own things, but I kept his books, his records, his armchair by the window. I felt him there, with me. Not as a ghost, but as a quiet, steady presence. A reminder to live honestly, to live bravely, to never let fear trap me in a life that was not my own. The journey was not easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt too heavy. The grief, the betrayal, the responsibility. But I was not alone. I had Maya, my steadfast friend. I had Mr. Thompson, my trusted advisor. And I had Sophie, my newfound family. We were a small, unconventional family, bound together by our love for a complicated, secretive, and wonderful man. One evening, I was sitting in my father's armchair, looking out at the city lights. I was reading one of his poetry books. A line jumped out at me. "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." I smiled. It was true. The truth had been a painful, messy, and difficult thing to uncover. But it had also been a gift. It had freed my father from Eleanor's grasp, even in death. It had freed me from a life lived in the shadows of her manipulation. And it had given me a new purpose, a new direction, a new understanding of who I was and where I came from. I thought about Eleanor and Julian, and I felt a strange sense of peace. I no longer felt anger or bitterness. I only felt a distant, detached pity. They had chosen a life of lies and greed, and they had paid the price. Their world had shrunk, while mine had expanded in ways I could never have imagined. They were trapped in the past, while I was looking toward the future. I closed the book and looked at the Swiss passport, which I kept on the desk. Adrien Dubois, Robert Miller, my father. He was a man of two names, of two lives, but he was also a man of great love and great courage. It had taken courage to plan his escape, to protect his legacy, to trust me with his final, most important secret. He had given me a map, and I had followed it. And it had led me here, to this quiet room, to this new life. It had led me home. The path forward was not entirely clear, but I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I had faced the darkest secrets of my family and had come out the other side, stronger and more whole. I had learned that family is not just about blood. It is about love, trust, and shared truth. I had found my true family, scattered across the world, and I knew that as long as we had each other, we would be okay. I picked up the phone and dialed Sophie's number. It was morning in Switzerland. I could hear the birds singing in her garden as she answered. "Clara," she said, her voice warm and bright. "I was just thinking of you." And as we talked, I felt a sense of connection, of belonging, that I had been searching for my whole life. The investigation was over. The fight was won. But the story, my story, was just beginning. And for the first time, I was excited to see what the next chapter would hold. My father had given me a key, and it had unlocked more than just a box of secrets. It had unlocked my future, and I would not waste it. Life settled into a new rhythm. The initial chaos of the inheritance and the legal battles faded, replaced by the steady work of running the company and managing the foundation. I found that I had a knack for it, a business sense I never knew I possessed. It was another piece of my father I had inherited, a part of Robert Miller that I was proud to carry on. I made sure the company was run with integrity, a stark contrast to the way Eleanor had tried to operate. We became known for our fair practices and our commitment to our employees. It was a legacy my father would have been proud of. The Adrien Dubois Foundation also flourished. We funded young artists, sponsored poetry readings, and provided grants for students studying abroad. I took a personal interest in every project, finding a deep sense of fulfillment in helping others pursue their passions. It was my way of keeping the spirit of Adrien Dubois alive, of sharing his love for the arts with the world. I often thought about how much he would have enjoyed it, how he would have loved to attend the gallery openings and listen to the young poets read their work. In a way, he was there. His legacy was in every painting we funded, every poem we celebrated. I maintained a close relationship with Sophie. We spoke on the phone every week, and I visited her in Switzerland several times a year. Our bond deepened with each visit. She was more than just my father's love. She became a mentor, a confidant, a grandmother figure I had never had. She taught me about art, about food, about the importance of living a life filled with beauty and joy. She shared more stories of my father, filling in the gaps of my knowledge, helping me to see him as a whole person, with all his flaws and all his strengths. During one of my visits, she took me to the university where she and my father had met. We walked the old stone corridors, and she pointed out the classroom where they first saw each other, the library where they used to study, the small cafe where they would share coffee and dreams. It was like walking through a ghost story, but it was not sad. It was a beautiful, poignant journey into the past. It helped me to understand the depth of their connection, the profound loss my father had suffered when he was forced to leave her behind. He never really left, she told me as we sat by the lake, the same lake where he had first told her he loved her. A part of him was always here, with me, and a part of me was always with him. She looked at me, her eyes shining. And now, a part of him is with you. You have his strength, his intelligence, but you also have his heart. Don't ever be afraid to use it, Clara. Her words stayed with me. I had spent so much of my life being cautious, being guarded, especially around Eleanor and Julian. I had built walls around my heart to protect myself. But now, I was learning to tear them down. I was learning to be open, to be vulnerable, to embrace the messy, beautiful complexity of life. I even found the courage to start dating again. It was a slow process. The betrayal I had experienced had left its scars. But I met a man, an architect named Ben, who was kind, patient, and understanding. He was not intimidated by my success or my complicated family history. He was simply interested in me, in who I was. He listened when I told him about my father, about Adrien Dubois, about the long, strange journey that had brought me to this point in my life. He did not judge. He just held my hand and told me I was the strongest person he had ever met. With Ben, I learned what a healthy relationship looked like. There were no games, no manipulations, no hidden agendas. There was just honesty, respect, and a deep, growing affection. It was a world away from the toxic environment I had grown up in. It was a world I had never thought I would be a part of. One day, Ben and I were walking through a park when we saw a young couple with their daughter. The father was swinging the little girl, and her laughter echoed through the trees. I stopped and watched them, a lump forming in my throat. Ben put his arm around me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm fine," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I was just thinking about my dad. I wish he could have had that. A simple, happy life. "He did have a happy life," Ben said, pulling me closer. "He had you, and he had Sophie. He found his happiness even if he had to fight for it. And he made sure you would have yours too. That's a pretty amazing legacy, if you ask me." He was right. My father's life had been complicated, but it had not been a tragedy. It had been a love story. A story of enduring love, of sacrifice, and of a father's fierce determination to protect his daughter. He had given me the greatest gift of all, the truth. And with that truth, he had given me the freedom to build my own life on my own terms. As the years passed, the sharp edges of the past began to soften. The pain of my father's death and the ugliness of Eleanor's betrayal became a part of my story, but they no longer defined me. I was defined by the life I was building, the love I was sharing, the good I was putting out into the world. I took Ben to Switzerland to meet Sophie. The two of them hit it off immediately. Watching them laugh together in her garden, I felt a sense of peace that was so profound, it almost brought me to tears. This was my family. This was my home. A home built not on secrets and lies, but on love, honesty, and a shared connection to a man who had touched all of our lives in different but equally powerful ways. We visited the cottage my father had been fixing up for me. Ben, being an architect, was full of ideas on how to finish the renovation. We decided to do it together. We would make it a place where our family, our strange, wonderful, transatlantic family, could gather. A place of light and laughter. A place where new memories could be made. One afternoon, while cleaning out the last of the boxes from the cottage, I found something I had missed before. It was a small, leather-bound photo album, tucked away at the bottom of a trunk. I opened it. It was filled with pictures of my father and Sophie from their college days. They were so young, so full of hope and promise. On the last page, there was a single photo of my father taken shortly before he died. He was standing in the garden of Sophie's house, smiling at the camera. He looked at peace. On the back of the photo, in his familiar, neat handwriting, were 3 words: "I am home." I closed the album, my heart full. He had found his home, and in a way, he had led me to mine. I was no longer just Robert Miller's daughter. I was also Adrienne Dubois' daughter. I was a part of both of his worlds. I was the keeper of his whole story, and I would carry it with me. Always. Not as a burden, but as a badge of honor. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of a new beginning, and there is always the enduring power of truth and love. The story was finally complete, and it had a happy ending after all. My ending, and I hoped his too. The foundation grew beyond my wildest dreams. We opened a second branch in Switzerland, a partnership with a local arts council that Sophie helped to establish. It became a bridge between 2 cultures, a symbol of the connection my father had fostered. We created an exchange program for artists, allowing them to travel, to learn, to share their work. It was a living, breathing testament to his 2 lives, now united in a single, beautiful purpose. Ben and I got married in Sophie's garden. It was a small, intimate ceremony, with just our closest friends and family. Maya was my maid of honor. Sophie stood beside me, a radiant, proud grandmother. As I said my vows, I felt my father's presence all around me. In the warmth of the sun, in the scent of the flowers, in the love that filled that small, perfect garden. I knew he would have been happy. He would have loved Ben. He would have been so proud of the life I had built. We decided to split our time between the city and Switzerland. We finished the cottage, turning it into a beautiful, light-filled home. It became our sanctuary, a place to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, a place to connect with nature and with each other. It was a place where we could just be. I learned to speak fluent French, and I spent hours talking with Sophie, listening to her stories, soaking up her wisdom. She taught me how to cook, how to garden, how to find joy in the simple things. She was a gift, a precious link to my father's secret heart, and I cherished every moment I had with her. I never heard from Eleanor or Julian again. I sometimes wondered what had become of them, but the thought was always a fleeting one. They were ghosts from a past that no longer had any power over me. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. Our worlds were separate now, and I was grateful for the distance. One day, a young woman came to the foundation's office in the city. She was an artist, a painter, and she was applying for a grant. Her work was raw, emotional, and incredibly talented. As I looked through her portfolio, I was struck by her passion, her fierce determination. She reminded me of myself all those years ago, a young woman trying to find her way in the world. We gave her the grant. I became her mentor, helping her to navigate the often difficult world of the arts. I saw her flourish, her talent blossoming, her confidence growing. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I was paying it forward, using the legacy my father had left me to help someone else achieve their dreams. It was the best way I could think of to honor him. Life was good. It was full. It was real. I had a loving husband, a wonderful family, and work that I was passionate about. I had found my place in the world. I had found my peace. Years later, Sophie passed away peacefully in her sleep. It was a profound loss, but I was filled with gratitude for the time we had together. She had given me so much, had taught me so much. She had helped me to heal, to grow, to become the woman I was meant to be. I knew that she and my father were together now. Somewhere, finally at peace. Ben and I inherited her house. We decided to keep it, to preserve it as a tribute to her and to my father. It was a place of love, a place of memories, and we wanted it to remain that way. We opened it up to the artists from our foundation, offering it as a residency, a place where they could come to create, to be inspired, to find their own peace. One evening, Ben and I were sitting in the garden watching the sunset paint the Alps in shades of pink and gold. We were holding hands, a comfortable silence between us. I thought about the long and winding road that had led me to this moment. The pain, the confusion, the anger, the discovery, the healing, the love. It had been a journey, but it had been my journey. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked, his voice soft. I smiled. "I was just thinking about my father," I said. I was thinking about how a story that started with so much sadness could end with so much joy. He squeezed my hand. "That's because you wrote the ending, Clara," he said. "You took the broken pieces and you built something beautiful." And he was right. I had. With the help of the people who loved me, I had taken a legacy of secrets and turned it into a legacy of hope. I had taken a story of betrayal and turned it into a story of love. I had taken the name of a stranger, Adrian Dubois, and made it a symbol of art, of beauty, of new beginnings. I looked out at the mountains, the same mountains my father had loved, and I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. The ghosts were gone. The secrets were laid to rest. There was only the present, beautiful and bright, and the future, full of promise. I was home, truly, finally home, and I was grateful, so incredibly grateful, for everything, the good, the bad, and the truth that had, in the end, set me free.